We are also, of course, able to work with the market infrastructure, just helping products, new products coming into the markets. And of course, which is what we are discussing today, climate finance being something very key for us. So most of our pipeline is focused on climate finance over the last 3 years. We entered Nigeria about 2017 when we first supported the government to issue the first green bond. And we've been present running different programs with different market actors. So in a short wrap, that is FSD Africa. Bello, over back to you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Really appreciate that intervention, particularly taking us down memory lane around the launch of the first green bond, which is a clear indication that the government of Nigeria for some time now has really been serious about ensuring that finance is mobilized for climate smart projects. I want to go into our main discussion now, and as a useful segue to that, when we talk about climate finance and green finance, it's very easy to touch on the projects that are traditionally green, like solar power projects. But everywhere you look across Nigeria, the infrastructure need is huge. Talk about a just energy transition, and what we have heard when we have engaged with MDAs at the federal and subnational level is Nigeria's infrastructure. So I'm going to throw this back to the panel. How are you approaching the financing of infrastructure, even with that clear focus on ensuring that climate considerations are a key part of your financing decision? I'm going to start, perhaps with Timothy from the Africa Development Bank. You're the Chief Climate Officer at the Africa Development Bank. Clearly, you have a mandate to ensure that not only 40% is climate finance, but broader. But I'm sure across Africa, you're hearing these stories around, we just want to finance Africa. We just want to finance infrastructure. How are you managing that in terms of across the bank, in terms of the lending decisions that you're making? Sorry, Timothy, if you can unmute.
Thanks, Gary. Just to really, build on what I said during the introduction about AFDB making the commitment for 25 billion and having 40% of our internal operations constitute climate finance. We have a clear strategy, and I believe that some of the panelists that we've been working with could attest to this. We have an upstream strategy that for every country, such as Nigeria, we have what we call the country strategy paper. And the country strategy paper is an upstream document that we engage with the government to ensure that within 5 years, these are the infrastructure projects that we are going to implement within the infrastructure pillars. So the first thing that we do is to make sure that these infrastructure projects take advantage of the concessional resources that are available, particularly through international financing mechanisms for climate. And they are able to integrate the development of the infrastructure and align it, integrated with climate change issues, and align it with the NDC. So once we've done that, then we come to where the rubber meets the road, and working with them to secure funding for the preparation of the projects. And we also help them to identify other sources. And if we are the lead arranger, then we have to also mobilize other investors that will be coming with us and having an approach that we call a tunnel of funds approach to see where each investor is really going to fit, and then also where each financing instrument could appropriately be addressed. So if it is grants, where do we go for grants? If it is a guarantee, where do we go for guarantee? If it is a debt, where do we go for debt? If it's equity or any mezzanine instrument, where do we go for those? And so we're able to work with the government. And sometimes these do not even have to be JEF projects or SIF projects or GCF projects. It could be our own internal project. And this is to ensure that we are not just depending on other sources of financing or other financing mechanisms, but internally we have our own operations to make sure that our regional member countries align their development objectives with their NDC targets. And this is what we've been doing. And we believe that we are doing the right thing. And as we've been discussing, there are a lot of things that African Development Bank and Nigeria could do together so that Nigeria, being the lead country of some sort in at least West Africa, could have some paradigms that, could be used to contextualize in other countries. And then also some best practices that we could, for example, this best practice of UK and IAF. Because one of the key issues that a lot of countries are really facing is how do we mobilize financing for early stage project preparation? And what you have done with UK and IAF is something that could be replicated. And we don't want it just to stop there. We believe that if we are able to have a whole cycle best practices that being a relatively large country with a lot of resources, we could also use to toot best practices and lesson learned.
Timothy, I think we're losing you. I think you've muted, but grateful.
I think somebody, I was muted. Maybe I exceeded my time, so I think I have to cede it back to you, Corey.
Excellent. Thank you, Timothy. I'm very grateful for your overview of then. I think I led you towards speaking to us widely about Africa. Maybe I could add to your comments around the commitment of $500 million that you indicated to our team is available for Nigeria to access for eligible projects. We may well come back to you, but perhaps we turn our attention to the panelists in the room. Ayan, AFC Partners seems to be involved in quite a number of sectors. Talk us through your approach in terms of financing infrastructure projects now, particularly with post-COP26 and the commitments towards net zero.
Thank you very much. So I think let's stay with Nigeria finance. So I've been involved in Nigeria work since 2016, 2017. Framework for transition for Nigeria to national debt. We still have that, and we are working also in Kaduna on 3-4 that have come to us. So I think let's step back. I really want to hone on the issue of just transition. So let's look at Nigeria. Economically, 88% of the country is dependent on oil. They'll outline what are the projects, how do you finance? So if you have a country that is already 88% and you need money from the government, you cannot ignore the existing resource. So that to me is pillar number one. So on the renewable side, our strategy is to support using solar and wind, but we need to maximize gas as a transitional fuel source. And that's the more practical way, because we still need the government to have so that they can write these PPAs that we usually, in most African countries, we ask them to guarantee the PPA in dollars, etc. So we need to really look at what is realistic for the country. A second part, again, I'm going to stay with mitigation for a little bit, is that because of the large population, if you look at the Nigeria today is losing a lot of forest cover. That is depleting so fast. So we need to restore that land. And we need to have CO2 as well. That will support Nigeria to get faster to its 2060. Then we need to look at each sector. What are the sectors that are emitting the most? You have power, transport is higher. There are industries today that actually use a lot of energy and they have captive power. So you need to look at transport is higher than power. It's higher than power because most Nigerians don't have access to power. So first, we need to increase access. Access in an affordable way for people who can afford it. So when we talked about the issue of the 100 million is key, number one, to support that this infrastructure is resilient, but equally important to support the transition. So it's very important that the developing countries, specifically in Africa, get that. You can't just tell them, stop your 88% of your government revenue. So that is how we look at this. Second, of the 100 million, very little, 14% have come for adaptation. And despite being the least contributor to the impacts of climate change, we suffer the most. We have fishermen that are no longer fish. We have farmers that are not seeing yields. We have erratic rains. And I think Timothy and his team, they did a lot on this work on both the adaptation and mitigation. And that's why I've been working very closely with the FAMDB and others. So it's very important to understand what are the numbers, what moves the economy, what are the sectors. Then you can talk about a specific climate strategy that links in to a just transition. What's the baseline? Where's this country starting from? So for us, we've been looking at, I personally have been looking at Nigeria for some time. When I was heading the private sector facility at the Green Climate Fund, and we worked with Timothy and AFC to get the Nigeria global framework to sector. But we need to also look at the industrial sector. We need to look at transport. We need to look at buildings that are using a lot of power. We're here. In addition to that, we need to look at resilience. Most of roads still need to be constructed, and you cannot do them the old way. All power systems have to be constructed. Many ports in Africa are in highly vulnerable areas. So I think that's how we look at it.
Thank you, Anne. I think you touched on a number of things that I'm sure people in the room inspired by, because what we hear when we speak to counterparts is that we need more power, we need more access to jobs and critical services. And in Nigeria, 80% of that goes via the roads. But I guess what you're saying is that we've got to look at financing this in a way that gradually the whole decarbonization strategy does not compromise, economic development, inclusive economic development. Taria, what's your approach at RAM in balancing these positions? In a second, I want to drive the conversation to lending requirements, because another key question that we hear. Can we have some help with the mic? Another key question that we hear from MDAs is, how do we actually access all these funds? So I'm going to go to each panelist. I'm trying to bid you time. You have a mic now. Okay, go ahead.
Great. I think infrastructure for Africa, there's no doubt that such a huge need, and any form of infrastructure that's built truly delivers an impact. Around economic just transition is extremely cogent for a country like economic stability that comes from our economy being a fossil fuel. But that being said, I think it's important for, and I'm speaking from a private sector standpoint, and as we try to as well to start building a transition strategy, and Nigeria has done some pretty impressive work with building out a transition strategy with the, as well as with the energy transition strategy that was commissioned by funds and infrastructure funds like ourselves are also preparing for transition. And so I think it's important for us to start thinking about how do we prepare for a green future. The reality switch into a new or almost a green economic order. And there has to be planning for that. How we think about the role of battery metals, how we think about building infrastructure that's resilient to climate change, and really positioning as mainstreaming climate, mainstreaming greening structure and energy. And I think that switch is going to be very crucial as a way to attract capital, but for the green future, ultimately to remain relevant and also expand with assets. Something that's really interesting. Nigeria, we effectively have to electrify study, and that's going to require massive amounts of renewable energy. We will continue to need gas as the base load, and so hybridization is going to be key. But hybridization is a mix of fuels, whether it's a of fuels, whether it's within the projects, so that we can have that transition of the probably sort of carbon intensive fuels like gas, lock in a growth pathway and the positions for the green future. We get quite a lot when we talk about the need for gas and that we need to continue investing in this.
Yep.
What if you lock in a gray?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And I think the point should be when we're developing projects and developing sectors that we actually have a framework for how we integrate a more carbon intensive path. We're very focused on renewable, on the new paradigms for distributed renewable energy in addition to the utility scale PV. Also sort of integrating in project design, okay, what is the pathways? Support them through an energy transition and also support them with becoming greener. Renewable energy projects, especially off-grid, that still needs some fossil fuel energy. Some of the interconnected grid projects that involve embedded energy, even if 75%. So we need to be able to some level of hybridization of our past, but are really preparing to dimension that with metrics. And this comes to the point of data. One of the things we really need in Nigeria is the data for the GHG emissions and to how we design projects. While there's a talk about the lack of bankable projects, projects are actually improving in bankability compared to structure 15, 20 years ago in Nigeria. I mean, so now there's an increasing number of bankable projects. Sponsors are getting savvier. Projects that maybe it's hard to find $1 billion project in $50 million projects, $100 million projects, sponsors that can get projects on the table. What we're lacking now is climate conscious projects that are standpoint. What are the have the projects actually emissions calculations and metrics? It ties to some of the work being thought about in terms of the database, and we need your climate capital, right? It will be very important for the transition, and that data to be able to measure hybrid projects and to be able to speak about the timeline for weaning off more carbon intensive solutions. I co-chair the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, and there's an entire path how you manage your reduction in emissions, and a lot of our also need to learn how to use carbon credits and the like to manage those pathways. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done. But I would say that hybridization, metrics, and figuring out a way to really plan for that future and design projects for a green future is very critical.
Thank you, Tori. So a number of things that you said really struck me, and that you reinforced this point of hybridization. And you raised something that we've been thinking internally within UK NAV, that the pathway to net zero has to be one where there are a mix of options, a gradual process of starting with where we are and then progressing on the decarbonization scale. For example, you've touched on the need for data around GHG emissions, which Gail keeps asking us about, that we should do more in that area. So I'm sure UKNIF teams are listening intently. But that takes us to this point of how do we get these projects funded? You raised the idea of, yes, there's a recognition that a hybrid of potential solutions. We can't just stop building roads the way that we do. We've got to build roads. Anytime we talk about the greening of our budget, I think we easily go to renewable energy. But again, our road building exercise is one that we've got to start thinking about, that decarbonization strategy, housing, industrial parks, which we're looking at as well. So as we land this session, it'd be useful to go back to the panel to really start thinking about, what are you now thinking about, given where Nigeria is in terms of the data, given where Nigeria needs to be in terms of the net zero journey by 2060. How are you looking at projects, and what sort of projects? The DG in the budget consultation meeting for 2020 declared that there's a 6 trillion naira deficit that needs to be funded, and part of what he hasn't said this to us, but I would imagine what he wants to hear is that how much are you putting towards that, and how can you do that? But central to that, as you said, is having projects that you can finance. So what sort of projects are you looking for, and what sort of considerations need to be met to be able to access that? So Ayan, let me start with you, and then we'll work through the panel.
So two points on that. first, I think we need to discuss what instruments, financial instruments that we need to make this happen. The first one is that you need a lot of equity capital, a lot of project structure projects in the design, in the in a very early stage in the feasibility and design, so that they can integrate both the resilience and the low carbon aspect. So, and I think we at AFC we use our equity. So we will have up to 100 million or so dedicated to project development. So that's very important. Second important is that we need to look at what are the sectors. So we talk a lot about renewable. Our fund will not look at renewable per se, but it will look at transmission lines for power. Because even if you generate all these renewable projects, we don't have an infrastructure on the power side that can absorb that. So we will look at transmission lines, but not the renewable power. That is one of the countries that we are focused on this fund, and the focus is how do we build resilient transmission lines for. So we've segregated where in that sector. We're going to look at transport, and transport is not just the ports or the roads, even though we do have some, but also mass transit. That will reduce emission in the transport sector and create more resilience in how people get from A to Z. Transport, logistics, industrial parks, very important. We are going to look very clearly at that. We have been looking at transitional metals, but some of our investors don't feel comfortable with mining. But is a home to all the metals in DRC that will stabilize and ensure that we have the electrical mobility that is low carbon. Yet people don't want to finance that. So I think instead of us reacting to the world is green, we need to really define the African narrative as to, okay, you want a green, but you don't have the transitional metals. We have to attract sufficient money for the core sectors that make Africa competitive. And that is mining, including these transitional metals. So I think it's the awareness that having an African voice towards this just transition. The world is going to come and plunder these resources, but we need to support those countries to have better pricing of their very natural resources. In Nigeria, we cannot ignore for emission, when we're talking emission of the forests. And that could be the people around it sufficient money so that they can improve their livelihood. So we cannot just focus on power, because if you look at Nigeria's emission, what power, you have to look at transport, you have to look at the land. These are the things that make emissions almost third. We don't have them. That's an infrastructure that needs to be built. So that's our focus.
Thank you, Ayan. I'm going to press you because your focus is clear. But what are your lending requirements? I know you.
So we're not doing lending. We're doing equity capital investment in risk assets. So our fund is not a debt fund. It's an equity fund. So what we want to do is to de-risk doing project development using equity, construction phase using equity. Once we reach financial close, that is a debt to equity, and we are open to the financial sector in Nigeria. We have lending also to finance that. So we are segregating. The focus for me is equity. Right. And Africa needs much more equity than that. Countries and companies are over indebted.
I think that deserves a round of applause. That's a fun, and I guess that's a real similarity with ARM as well, in the sense that there's equity at play, de-risking as a way of pooling in debt capital or additional capital. Let's turn to you, Taria. So your approach to choosing the projects that you invest in, University?
Sure. So the climate fund that we are right now, and also on renewable energy for cities, industrials, different forms of commercial entities, in order to reduce their potential emissions as economic activity continues to accelerate. What we found is that cities are effectively on the front lines of climate change, emission standpoint, as well as a resilience standpoint in West Africa. And from an emission standpoint, it ties to the level of economic activity. As countries, and so the cities are burgeoning. It's quite interesting that in West Africa, cities are responsible for anything from 30 to 60% of GDP. That's their contribution. So much economic activity around them. So it's important to address the issue of electrification and clean cooking. When we talk about deforestation, a lot of deforestation in Africa is not for clean cooking in rural areas. It's for agriculture, and that food feeds cities, and it's for fuel, and that biomass fuels cities. So what we're finding is that cities are really, and urban areas, and economic activity around urban areas, and industrialization around urban areas, port activity, all the roads and transportation, that is actually what is the potential of consumption, and that is one of the areas with which we can actually do a lot of reduction of GHG emissions. And then there's the tie-ins to resilience. A lot of West African urban areas on the coast, and so they're exposed, and a lot of the roads would deal with more resilient issue of instruments. And Ayana has spoken about equity and project development, and I think successful infrastructure investors in Africa have done so by being able to provide structuring capability early on in projects, and also project development equity capital, and also the issue of local currency equity, and local currency debt. Foreign currency equity. And of course, many of us will continue to bring in foreign currency equity to especially impact climate action, and to sort of channel a lot of capital. It's important for us to work with the Nigerian pension fund, and that's why that's sort of what we're doing, is trying to mobilize more domestic pension fund capital to the equity asset class, so in a local currency form. Also to be able to get these projects to operations, and then so you'll see a lot of us that are trying to bring in innovation into taking projects to financial close by using a larger amount of equity in the capital structure, and be it your construction debt, different forms of mezzanine. Because the other challenge we found, projects take too long to close, and so part of what we're trying to do is use sort of, we've learned a lot over the last few, over the line. And to the extent that we can have to develop projects and then take up a larger check size of the project costs, de-risk with local currency, will actually have a more sustainable system. Because I think this idea that we'll continue to finance economic growth with all dollars, the reality is that equity dollars tend to be easier to get. So let's use the equity dollars to build, and try to continue to build out our capital markets and build to our approach. So that's it. I think that's something that's quite important to think about.
Thanks, Terry. It is, and the more I reflect on, what you and Ayana are saying, you're bringing the private equity perspective into this conversation, and in a minute, I really want to turn on your appetite for public projects, given the fact that your engagement to to play in that space is perhaps through PPPs. So I'll come back to that in a second. Let me just go to the African Development Bank on this question that I probably should have started with them. So, Timothy, there are a number of projects on the 2022 budget pipeline in the Nigerian Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, the thematic areas, and there are areas that have been highlighted as part of the Medium-Term National Development Plan as well. As the Budget Office begins to think about how these projects are financed, what are your key requirements from a lending perspective for projects that might be positioned for financing from the African Development Bank? You're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Gore. I think we need to segregate the climate finance component from the standard financing of infrastructure. And then when we are able to dissect, then we are able to find respective criteria for each of them, because they are different, although they have to be linked together in a comprehensive way. So and then we also have to look at if it is a sovereign operation or non-sovereign operation. For non-sovereign operation, usually it's not very, for sovereign operation, it's usually not very difficult, because governments have their headrooms, and the AFDB has CSP that I referred to. So if they prioritize a project, that this is our priority project, and this is where our location, whether through the African Development Fund window or the African Development Bank window or NTF, then we integrate it into what we call our indicative operational programming, IOP, and then that is taken care of. It's different from NSOs or private sector. And for the private sector, which we have not been seeing a lot, and that is where we also may have to go. If I may be permitted to deviate a little bit, that is where we could really increase the scope and the diversity of the projects. So when you are able to have diversity of projects, you're also able to enhance your asset allocation for the infrastructure. Currently, we are not really seeing that. And you could even testify that even for this meeting, we should have had Dangote, we should have had BUA, MTN Nigeria, Seplat, Nigerian breweries, but they are not here. So all that we're talking about is more on the sovereign side. And for the non-sovereign side, I mean, a lot of these companies also have, solid financials, solid balance sheets that could tap into AFDB finance. And that will provide the opportunity to bring in the climate dimension. Because as an MDB, AFDB is required to provide some form of co-financing for every funding proposal that we submit to DCF, for instance. And it's the same thing with Jeff and others. So we looked at how really the projects that the government have approved or the projects that the private sector is pursuing. Now, in the climate side, we look at the climate rationale. We look at how it's able to really align with the NDC of the country. In the deal side, there are several criteria that we use for gauging the financial viability. And some of these terms are very, well known to us. A lot of us have been doing financial due diligence transactions and all that. So I don't want to belabor on the traditional. But on the climate finance, where currently it's a niche, but we believe that is going to be the mainstream and is going to be an integral part of countries' development, is where we really need to focus. So for that, the criteria that we use, really, looking at how do we address the risk perception, because climate change has some inherent uncertainty and risk, and then it also have significant incremental costs. For example, if you are looking at the climate resilient roads in Nigeria, in Lagos, for instance, when it rains, the whole street is flooded, and the economic use of the roads are really diminished. And how do you really make sure that such roads are covered, they have good drainage system? Now, that is an additional cost that if it is taken care of, it becomes part of the engineering. And so how do you really address this risk? And there are a lot of instruments that we've been using, some risk capital, some form of insurance, some form of guarantees, and other credit enhancement products to help really take care of that. And we actually have a cascade approach. And what we do is for the NSOs, we engage with the government in a cascading approach. And you will actually have that experience, Gori, when we come to where the rubber meets the road. We've been discussing a lot on the upstream side, but when we come to the downstream side, where we are getting to the transactions and others, we have a cascading approach that helps us to really weed out the projects that are not really financially viable comparatively, or do not have significant climate rationale, or do not really have those financing structures that will help to close that transaction. And what we do is that it helps us to allocate resources to projects that we really take care of, because we can't do everything. I know there are a lot.
Thank you, Timothy. I think there's quite a lot there that you've outlined, and as you're speaking, about 2 or 3 things really stuck to mind that I think we need to emphasize to the audience. In terms of funding that is available for Nigeria, that's covered in terms of the country ceiling, but it appears that you want to do a bit more in terms of private sector lending. So I guess working with more closely with the private sector, perhaps private equity providers who are involved in actually structuring projects. So,
Gori, if I may, just 1 second. I'm not talking of private sector financiers. I'm talking more about private sector companies and developers. For example, if you take Dangote, how could you really exclude Dangote out of your NDC target? They produce cement, DUA. So that is where I'm focusing on, not the financing side, more on the.
Thanks for clarifying that. I will make sure that in subsequent sessions that we hold, we will bear that in mind to make sure that we can provide that sort of bridge. I've got one eye on the clock, and I want to make sure that before we finalize and we go for lunch, we are clear on some of the messages that are coming out. We have a mix of financial institutions on this panel, private equity infrastructure funds, who are demonstrating to us very, very clearly their interest in funding and finding and engaging in climate smart projects. I think what we've heard from both AFC Capital Partners and ARM Harith is that they understand that there's a transition and a particular pathway for Nigeria, and they're engaged in multiple sectors in different ways. I'm going to ask them a final question, as I said, around how they engage with public sector projects, the sort of projects being supported by subnationals as well as federal MDAs, and maybe any sort of parting messages that they want to give to public sector officials in terms of how to help them to be more engaged and interested in some of the projects that they are putting forward. I also, Victor, want to give you an opportunity now to really set out from an FSD point of view how Fsd Africa can work with federal and subnational MDAs in terms of positioning projects that are being developed on this, pipeline on the climate finance database that we're developing. How you can work with them to position such projects for financing. 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Bello, for that opportunity. I think all our projects are actually they're arranged and structured around partnership, and we actually we do like and really favor having partners, especially within the government, and we can offer quite a lot of support. One of the support, of course, is financial. The second one is non-financial. On the non-financial side, actually, we are able to partner with them and offer them technical assistance, because within FSD Africa, we are all specialists and expertise in our own way, with quite a number of decades of experience and in the financial markets. We are also able to borrow from our experience from other markets and other governments we've worked with. We continuously learn from our projects and are able actually to scale up and bring those lessons and learnings to our partners. So pick, for example, this morning we had a meeting with the Ministry of Water and Resources, and that is OPS WASH. And we're just discussing on how we could support them to issue a blue bond, and they needed some certain level of technical capacity that we could offer and bring on board with them. And of course, we've agreed on a way forward on how to support them, especially on the structuring of the project itself and what they would like to do. If the project is wash it or what they're working on, then working from the financial point of view and structuring the project to be able to hand in a proper, well-budgeted project to the Ministry of Finance, who will then, of course, be able to issue a bond to finance this. And of course, on the financing side, we are able to pay in any consultants or any external parties who need to come in, auditors, verifiers, second-party opinions. We're able to pay this ourselves from our own budgets to support the different ministries. We've done this successfully in different countries. Pick, for example, in Kenya, we were actually able to support about 8 ministries who are able to put together their projects. And we were able to look at the projects that met the ICMA Green Principles criteria. And these projects actually have now officially been accepted by the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Finance is on queue to issue quite a sizable bond in Kenya. It will be the first green bond, and we just had to work with each of those ministries from the ground up, so that by the time this reaches the Ministry of Finance or the Debt Management Office, every ministry will actually have a strong case for them to have financing provided for their projects. So that's what we look for, helping and working together with each of the ministries so that they're able to build up a strong case for a green bond or a blue bond or an environmental bond, even social bonds that we've already worked with certain governments on issuance of social bonds. So yes, that is basically how we can partner with the different ministries on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. I think we hear that loud and clear. Fsd Africa is pitching out to be a partner to provide technical assistance, capacity development, and financing for structuring public projects to be packaged as bonds. So please take note of that, and I'm sure your phones will be ringing now and into the future. I want to specially recognize, before I move on to the final part of our panel, Olamide Fagui from the Office of the Vice President. Please stand. Thank you very much. Good to have you here with us. And I believe we also had Asma Jibril, Head of Mitigation Division, Climate Change Department, Ministry of Environment. Thank you for joining us. Okay, you have the final floor. You've spoken quite a lot about the projects that you're interested in. Given the audience that we have here, being the public sector, for you to be able to engage in these projects have to be PPP-able. They have to be projects that allow for private sector participation, some degree of concession. Based on your experience, what sort of closing messages do you want to give this audience in terms of how projects could be attractive for you to engage in and bid for? Let's start with Taria.
We have quite a bit of experience in scale projects. I think the challenge with PPPs has often been just what it takes. But ultimately, the legal framework for private participation and partnership, and sort of working with the government and the government. Private sector participation is ultimately about, so sort of managing that dynamic is critical, as well as ensuring, the PPP discussion is a much more intense discussion, and I think I would just like to touch on public and private partnership in the context of climate. Is a very good environment, one where there's lots of private participants. In fact, we're quite lucky. Private sectors and entrepreneurial sectors. And so what that means is, as the detailed implementation by public funding, and private sector will not be able to mobilize capital into that. That which is purely private sector that can be funded, that requires some kind of joint relationship where the government needs to provide some sort of support, be it and beyond just policy support. So with the pure private, one where the government has basically sort of emphasized certain how funds like us be able to identify those areas, and as we're fundraising and as we're meeting our metrics, we're able to say that those projects fit into the NDC. So that is critical. And then we need the policies that are going to be stable and will not change. Now, one area that really needs to be contemplated is the issue of subsidies, whether it's direct or indirect. Because what often happens around bankability is several sectors are not bankable because there might be competing more carbon-intensive sectors that are benefiting from certain subsidies, right, benefiting from access to foreign exchange, things like that. So that entire world around thought through and addressed so that private projects that are bankable side of that can actually be financed. So that's very important. Now, on the PPP side of things, there are going to be sectors that with some element of subsidy, with some element of support or blended finance, private capital can come in. And a lot of the time, the donors to work with government, and a classic example of this is the World Bank, AFDB. Keeping policies in place, ensuring that things don't change, and private investors can actually make a projection over 10 years and know that they're going to actually be able to get those payments. And I think what's happening with the payment system for it is relatively stable, and given that the partnership is an expectation that the policy will remain stable. I think but with FCG, I'll just make the comment that some folks listening, that one of the successful aspects of the World Bank AFDB program is the fact that it's country-led. And the system is actually managed in Nigeria. So there's an office in the to engage with the government, to the people that are involved. And so we need to think all the different aspects of the NDC programmatic themes so that when entrepreneurs go into a particular sector, leads for policy engagement, subsidy engagement, performance-based grants, whatever those things are that they can engage on. Countries outside, other countries in Africa, for example, that have off-grid programs where the international support is still offshore, have not been as successful because you have to fly to DC. So this issue of I think the international community trying to in country, and then for government more stability on how you are able to manage your collections, manage payments.
Thanks, Terry. That gives a lot to think about. Key things there is political stability, making sure that the engagement of donors is grounded by having country-led representations. What you didn't mention is a pipeline, and I'm going to say more about that. Maybe just hear from Jan, because you're leading me to believe you already have identified a pipeline, or you just need is the policy space to get on with structuring these projects for delivery, or not.
So I think so our fund is Pan-African, so it's not only Nigerian focus, even though Nigeria will probably, given our current pipeline, and it's such a large country. So I think, let me step back. You're talking about sovereign.
Yes, engaging with sovereign.
So let's be very specific. So a lot of infrastructure is about dealing with the sovereign. I think Terry outlined the need for stability in these assets and so on and so forth. But a lot of these projects that we're financing eventually will be back in the government. So let me be very specific. So on these fund, infrastructure climate resilient fund, I should recognize the Ministry of Environment. I think on what can we do in the roads and transport sectors. So it's not so much that that outside of the government sphere. So I come from a small little country that's not known to a lot of people, where and the public sector have learned to coexist very well, and that's Somaliland. So what you have is that they meet all the time. They're like, okay, what can you handle? What can I handle? That receives zero foreign aid, highest telecom penetration rates, biggest money support. Collectively, the port of Berbera is now managed by a foreign investor, DP World. So, and the country gets around 10 billion in remittances. So the government contracts trash collection to the private sector. So what you have is that they all meet with the big private sector guys and they're like, okay, without this thing, how do we do it? What part do you have? What part should I have? So that's my construct. And this is very. So having said that, how do we do that in Nigeria? So I think it's very important to look at what are the things that you need the government to do. So I think 2 years ago, our president and CEO, Samara Zubero, created a sovereign lending arm within AFC. So that's going to play a critical role, and you will see some kind of a sovereign fund coming through AFC Capital in the near future. Raise this fund. With respect to ICRF, all the risks we're doing, these are we're assets, they're government assets that we are supporting, maybe through private ownership or private management. So that's why I don't want to separate it in that context. The last part is significant amount of climate finance that should come directly to the government, because the has a lot of vulnerability. So when you're looking at small farmers, these are young, one person with few hectares, that money has to be to support the resilience of that. So I still think it's about coming together, figuring out who should do what, and then supporting each other to have the finance for that. So I'm going to just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists for this session. This has been a very loaded session. We've overrun slightly, but with that, we have a wealth of information that we can leave this room as we go for lunch. What I've heard has really given me a real sense that, from a climate finance point of view, there are significant funds available for sovereign lending. We heard from the African Development Bank that this is really based on requests that the federal government makes to the bank. We've heard from Fsd Africa that in terms of positioning projects for bonds, they provide support in terms of technical assistance and financing to structure projects. And we've also heard from private sector infrastructure fund providers, ARM, Harith, and AFC Capital Partners, on their willingness to look at projects and partner with government to ensure that the private sector plays their part. Quite a lot there, quite a lot for us as individual MDAs and our team to reflect on. But finally, to bring in this session to a close, can I just ask that we just thank our panel once again for their wonderful contributions and the time that they have taken to really help us think about how we can position projects for financing. Thank you. I'm just going to hand over now to Dio, who's going to tell us the arrangements for lunch.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Corey. And I want to say thank you to our wonderful panelists. I think over the course of these 2 days, how everything comes together will become clearer in terms of, especially in terms of the support that UK NIAF has been giving, sort of working with the Budget Office and also working with the financing institutions who are here today. You've heard from them. So we're going to go for lunch, and then lunch is organized in the room, in the next room across. So if we can just, orderly just make our way to enjoy the lunch. Lunch is going to run for about 30 minutes. So after lunch, we expect to please see everybody back here, because the next session is going to be even more interesting. So I look forward to seeing all of you back in a short while as we break for lunch. Thank you, everybody. slightly delayed for the second half of the day for about another 10 minutes while we just resolve a small security issue. So please bear with us and just give us about 10 minutes to quickly resolve this matter. Please. We ask people to just be patient. Thank you very much.
Can you? Yes, that Andreas and I. Hi, Ron.
John, you wanted to do an audio test, John and Andreas. Let's use the time to do that.
Hi, Ron.
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Hi.
Andreas, I can hear
I
you.
can see you.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Could you test your audio, please?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, can't hear you.
We can hear each other.
John, is your audio working?
Mine is, but Andreas and I
Yeah.
can hear each
Coming
other.
through.
Yes.
Just a second.
Is it coming through, Ron?
No.
Can you hear anything, Ron? Can you hear us?
No, not yet.
Yeah, they can hear you.
We can hear the room and we can hear each other. But you
Yeah.
appear not to hear us.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you, okay?
Okay, it's back.
Hello?
This is the audio.
Can you hear us?
Yes, John. Thanks. Thanks.
Great.
We're in business now. Good, good.
Excellent.
We could hear you all right.
Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back from lunch. It was a very well-deserved lunch. We have two really engaging sessions before we close out on the Climate Finance Workshop Day 1. And we're going to be heavily reliant on technology in this session because all our moderators and presenters are joining us virtually from different locations via Teams. Let me start by introducing Andreas Cole. He's the Sustainable Finance Advisor, UK and IF, joining us remotely from London. And then we have John Davey. He's a Senior Advisor, Infrastructure Finance and PPP, joining us from Redbourne, I believe it, not too far away from me, and just off the London M25. We also have joining us a little bit later is Victor Nkiri. He's a senior we know Victor. He's a senior capital market specialist. Fsd Africa is joining us back. Welcome back, gentlemen. I'm going to hand over to Andreas. Andreas, you're going to be leading us out here, and I'm moderating from Teams. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Corey. I hope you can hear me well. I hope you had a good lunch, and I hope you didn't have too much lunch, so you were can follow us the next couple of minutes where we are presenting a few case studies. We have invited for this afternoon two organizations, one Fsd Africa and Infra Credit. I hope Infra Credit will dial in a bit later. We're still trying to connect with them. I did prepare a little bit of introduction to Victor, but since I assume he's been on the panel before, people are in the audience are familiar with Victor. Just another brief. Victor is a senior financial market specialist at Fsd Africa. He's involved on several fronts, implementing of strategies to enhance capital markets across the Sub-Saharan Africa market. Victor is so kind and prepared a presentation for us, or a case study on some of the work he's done in the past. And I would like to hand over the microphone to Victor to take the floor for the next, 15, 20 minutes, and then we can do some question and answers.
Andreas, thank you so much. I think should I put up my presentation? I can share. my screen?
Yeah, I'm not. Corey, are we managing this from ourselves, or you take over the presentation? Ron, how shall we do this? Shall Victor just share his screen?
Yes, you can just go ahead and share the presentation.
Okay.
Using the button on the top right.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I'm going to stop sharing our screen, and then you can go ahead. Should work now.
Thank you. Is it up on your end?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Andreas, for the introduction. As Andreas has said, my name is Victor Nkiri. I work with Fsd Africa, and I'll just do a short introduction of Fsd Africa, which is a financial sector deepening Africa. And this is a development finance agency based in Nairobi, which promotes poverty reduction through financial sector development across sub-Saharan Africa. We see ourselves as a catalyst of change, working with partners to build financial markets that are robust, that are efficient, and above all, markets that are inclusive. We use funding, research, and technical assistance and technical expertise to identify market failures, and we strengthen capacity of our partners to improve access to financial services and drive economic growth. Fsd Africa is a regional platform for financial markets development, and we aim to foster collaboration, best practice, transfer, economies of scale, coherence through champions of change that we establish in sub-Saharan Africa. And we believe in investing in building financial systems that are transparent, stable, accessible, and that are able to create a condition for a fair and sustainable future. We are actively supporting development capital in Africa, given the central role of channeling investment and driving economic growth. And we are actually promoting long-term capital accessibility throughout Africa. We are funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. This is FCDO. And we work alongside governments, businesses, regulators, policymakers, and we build ambitious programs that make financial markets work better for everyone. Depending on the projects that we're working on, we can provide a combination of grants, we can provide investment capital, we can provide market insights and technical assistance to ensure that the objectives are achieved. Investment capital is strategically deployed to provide additionality where non-financial objectives are in addition to classic risk and return objectives, and market-based funders would not provide the capital without demonstration. The investment capital funds have a strong mandate for impact, while at the same time seeking some nominal, to achieve some nominal financial objectives. Each investment is considered on an individual basis and needs to meet all the objectives or criteria of that part of the mandate. On the technical assistance side, we're able to come up with a wealth of specialists within the team in Fsd Africa that have a diverse experience in financial markets over decades. With this, we are able to offer thought leadership, policy and regulatory advising, fund structuring, new products design, climate finance advisory, etc. We offer financial support by paying external resources to support our partners in projects and to make sure the projects are successful. I start with this first slide after speaking about Fsd Africa, and this is just an African proverb that it says, if you have a vision for a year, then you should plant wheat. If you have a vision for a decade, then probably you should plant trees. But if you have a vision for a lifetime, then plant people. And this is basically just looking into climate finance, and the proverb really speaks about what we will be discussing this afternoon, and actually what we'll be discussing today and tomorrow for these 2 days. So well, the issue about climate finance is something that is now common and it's known, and limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees, which actually John in the morning did a very good job of introducing the Paris Agreement and what COP is all about. Of course, that was really an exciting session for me, because we are all awaiting for 2022, where COP 27 will be held in Africa, in Egypt. So limiting this global warming to 1.5 degrees required rapid and far-reaching transition in energy, land, urban infrastructure, and industrial systems. OECD, of course, has estimated annually that we need about $6.9 trillion to be able to meet these objectives by 2030. Nigeria alone needs about $3 trillion US for the next 30 years to be able to meet its infrastructure objectives. And to meet this, we require mobilization of public funds together with private funds, what is popularly called blended finance. We need government policies that reduce risk and climate-friendly investments and mobilization of the same. Bond markets through green, social, and sustainable bonds play an essential role in attracting private capital for climate finance. The green finance trend, which is what the globe and Africa as a continent is looking at, and probably why we are seated in this room today and tomorrow, is basically to discuss what you would want to call the elephant in the room. So sub-Saharan African governments have limited fiscal space, and this has been made worse by the recent COVID pandemic that we've had. And economists are actually estimating that these losses that we've suffered from COVID in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, will last for about 5 years. The funding gap created since COVID started in 2020 will run for about 4 years, is estimated to be about $410 billion. And to cover this amount of funding, crowding in of private finance from international domestic sources is no longer nice to have, but a necessity to have. So this is how, of course, we do it. We crowd in, and that's why we're seated here, to see how we can do this. So green economy, it is clear that the green economy is a clear channel to deliver faster and better quality growth, to be able to recover from where we are. Global finance industry is undergoing a transformation to decarbonize. And so what you're finding is that investors are reducing their exposures in assets that are carrying climate risk and are actively increasing investments towards green projects. Of course, nobody wants to be left holding stranded assets. And because of that, you're seeing a move by several investors to reduce on their risk on their portfolios. Climate change, of course, presents a $3 trillion investment opportunity for Africa by 2030. And it is expected that 75% of these investments will come from the private sector. Over 60% of NDCs of African countries are subject to available finance, capacity, and technology transfer. The good news, of course, is that these are opportunities, and in Nigeria, who's seated in a very good position in terms of availability of finance, even domestic funds are available, and there's a good appetite from foreign and external investors to invest in the country. The numbers on the left of the screen are self-explanatory. These are numbers that have come from Paris Agreement and from different papers that have been written and estimated to have those numbers. Let me speak a little bit about FSD Africa and our theory of change, and this will just help start painting a picture of how we as a development agency think. And I want to bring your attention to the lower bottom, to the lower right and left bottom cells. So on the right, on the lower bottom right, you have the green and sustainable finance, which is where our theory of change begins, and we want to do that. On the other side, we have domestic capital markets that we are looking at, and we want to make deeper and more efficient domestic capital markets for example, through reducing cost of access to these markets. On the other side, on the right side, we want to increase financing directed to climate adaptation and mitigation projects. And we do this, of course, through environmental sustainability and greater resilient and carbon neutral growth. And of course, once we have deeper capital markets, you have increased access to to both public and private sector, to infrastructure, to housing, to corporate sector, and all that. These two boil up and are able to meet up now with a high-level focus, which is the Sustainable Development Goals and the real sector economy outcomes. And we do this through creating jobs and employments. We also do this by creating access to basic services, water and sanitation, electricity, energy. We do this for a sustainable future, making sure you have green buildings, marine, and your oceans, and all that. So that is basically how our high-level theory of change works in FSD Africa. I put up this slide just to explain what is probably now referred to as the donut economy. If you're in Africa, you probably want to call it the coconut economy. And this simply just explains how supply and demand works. And this is how basically as FSD Africa, we are able to see it and able to structure our programs. Now, I'm just giving this as a foundation just to help you see how we think as FSD Africa and the lenses that we wear and are able to see this. Of course, on one side you have demand, on the other side you have supply inside your donut or inside your coconut, and you're able actually to see how this works together. You have your market players who are seated on the outside, you have your private sector on the right, you have your government on the left, and you have your networks, and of course other market actors that are there on the lower side. You have your rules, your regulation, your standards, your policies on the lower end, and on the upper side you have your supporting functions, which is the market infrastructure. How is it informing and communicating, and how other related services are working from your intermediaries and everyone else in that particular sector, how they are building up information and communication. So we took this donut or coconut and actually flattened it out and translated it to something that for capital markets. And in terms of capital markets, we stripped that and actually put it up in a format that speaks to capital markets. And now this basically is how we see the capital markets work. Again, on the inside, you have your demand and supply, you have your government on the far right, you have your private sector on the far left, and you have international partners also coming in, and your networks, your regulations, you have your rules, you have your structures up there, informing and communicating. And this is just a way that we are able to see the market in one particular slide. So how do we work? How are we able to design these programs as FSD Africa? So our approach to market is critical for all interventions as we come to market. How are we going to approach the market? We need to understand the market interdependencies and all the components that are moving. You have very many moving parts. Some of them are complex, some of them not that complex. And we work with all of them in parallel, of course, appreciating that you cannot only address one particular component because they're all interdependent on each other. So that wholesome look is very key, and making sure that you're working with all these components parallel. We divide them into three. Policy and regulation. Of course, this is working on policy development, which just promotes financial stability and resilience. Market infrastructure, we of course look at the incentives for innovation in those particular markets, for designing products and everything that is there. This is like just the railway line that allows to carry your train. And then we look at the market actors and do they have capacity? Are they well knowledgeable? Are they well able to use both the policy and the infrastructure that has been designed? And I'll just just explain a little bit more now from a case study basis of how we've been able to do this. Policy and regulation. So we play a unique role in driving sustainable policy development that will facilitate the growth of green bonds and issuances. One of the biggest problems that we have seen, and this of course has been very evident across the continent, and we have also witnessed it in Nigeria since we started working our programs in Nigeria in 2017. That the biggest problem we've seen is market fragmentation. And policy and regulation is very key in addressing this issue because it creates clear guidances for ministries and for even the MDAs. And what I was very happy about is when I was able to see the FGN 2020 budget call circular from the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. And it clearly spoke about climate infrastructure. And I think that was point 4.5.5 on page 17 of that document. Really, it was a clear celebration, I think, from our end, just to see that clear communication to all ministries and providing an eligibility criteria that all ministries that can now follow as far as climate smart infrastructure projects are concerned. And this is such great news because it addresses the issue I've spoken about of just having fragmentation, whereby each MDA can now design projects that are focused on green, and those are bundled separately from your other normal projects that you'd like financed. So as each MDA does that, then what happens once your funding requests reach the Ministry of Finance, they will have this huge pool now that they can call climate smart infrastructure projects that require to be funded. And then the DMO can be able to come to the market and issue a $1 billion green bond, which is able to fund all these projects. And size is very key because when you come to market and issue a sizable bond like that, then it is really a strong communication, not just about how serious Nigeria is on achieving its NDCs, but also a big communication to both the continent and to the world that you have decided to invest in people and are looking at the country from a long-term objective. The biggest problem from just the interactions we've had with the Ministry of Finance so far is they have been unable to issue a sizable green bond because of projects creation. So that's why this is a huge celebration for us, and we are happy to see this. It's come a long way. We have also been able to achieve the same in Kenya, whereby we supported the structuring of different projects by different ministries. We were actually able to bring together 8 different ministries that put together their projects of climate finance or projects that needed to be financed through climate green bond. And quite a sizable number of projects were put together because now the MDAs were working together, and each MDA from each ministry was trying to structure projects that are climate focused. And then all these were finally, after we helped them put together, we were able to submit all this to the Ministry of Finance, and we are expecting a green bond to be issued in the first quarter of the first quarter of January. And this will probably be the largest green bond issued out of South Africa, in Africa. And we are just, this is really for us as FSD Africa was a test of a hypothesis that actually when you work with policies, and when you work and break that fragmentation and ministries are able to work together, then it actually enhances it actually enhances the issuance program. The second thing is market infrastructure. My apologies for the background noise. There's nothing much I can do about it. The second issue is market infrastructure. We work together with our local partners to ensure the availability of a range of services that support governments, investors, and financial institutions are in place to contribute to economic growth. So market infrastructure is very key, and what I've put there, the image you're seeing on your right is the first green bond that was issued by the federal government of Nigeria. And this was the first certified green bond to be issued in Africa, and the first sovereign green bond to be issued. And it was such a huge innovation, and I think it is something that really will continue giving pride to the country of Nigeria for a long time. And this was really good. FSD Africa, we participated in supporting this particular bond issuance. We paid for the pre and post issuance verification for the bond. We paid external auditors who were actually able to come and verify that the projects that had been selected were actually green. There were green projects, and the verifier was able to submit his verification to Climate Bond Initiative, who then actually issued a green bond certification for this bond to certify it as a green bond. So it was certified by the CBI, and this was such a huge success for Nigeria. So market infrastructures, of course, continue to promote access to inclusive capital, and we just didn't do this for Nigeria government only. We have done this for 4 corporates in Nigeria that have come to market. We have supported them in terms of infrastructure, making sure that they have all that is required to be able to come to market, and just to support that. The third is market actors, working with market actors. This, of course, is using our technical assistance facility. And when I say technical assistance, this means both financial and non-financial. As I mentioned, FSD Africa, we are a group of specialists, all of us well qualified with quite a number of years of expertise, and we are able to offer support by ourselves within the team. So one thing that we have done to support, of course, the government of Nigeria is we looked at the green bond framework that was there initially, that was used for the first bond. And after our assessment of the green framework, working together with the Federal Ministry of the Federal Ministry of Environment, and this is the Department of Climate Change, who have been such an amazing partner to work with, I have to say, Halima Bawa and her team. And we were actually able to review the Green Bond Framework to make it stronger, because we discovered the government will actually not be able to use that framework going forward to issue subsequent bonds. So we did this last year, and in May last year, 2020, we actually revised it and reissued a better green bond framework that the government can now use for the foreseeable future. Does not need to be changed in any way. It's quite sufficient to issue a number of bonds, and this is actually really good news for all the ministries. If you need to issue something, if you have a project on waste management, if you have a project on water, if you have a project on energy, if you have a project on on afforestation, if you have a project, you name it, that falls anywhere under green, the green bond framework is sufficient enough to take in this project and be able to issue the bond. So this also helps both the debt management office just to know that they're now fully covered in terms of issuance of green bond. They have a proper framework that can be used. We've done capacity building sessions just before COVID in 2019. I think we had quite a very good capacity building session in Abuja. I can't remember how many ministries we had present, probably almost 10 ministries came, and we really, this was supported through the Nigeria Green Bond Program, just to support capacity building for the ministries. With that said, using those 3 ways and using those case studies, both for the market actors and the market infrastructure and policy and regulation, I'll just quickly jump into our green bond programs. This is currently where we are working with our green bond programs in Africa. Of course, as Fsd Africa, we have many other programs. We have our programs in about 30 countries in Africa. And just for the green bond program, this is where we are. We have Morocco, which is looking to issue, we are supporting them to issue a bond again, first quarter of next year. We've started working with all the 8 countries of WAEMU and looking at the green bond pipelines and trying to structure green bonds out of there. There's quite some excitement. We've seen a few corporates issue private green bonds, and we're excited about the WAEMU region. Ghana, we're working with Ghana, and we already have green bond listing guidelines that have been issued. Of course, we're in Nigeria since 2017. Rwanda, we're supporting Rwanda. Kenya Sovereign Bond, we've been working with that. I've already mentioned them as a case study. We're also working in Malawi and helping the government there, of course, to do their green bond. On a regional basis, we have a few programs, capacity building programs, helping the market actors to build their capacity. We've currently partnered with the Cambridge University in London and the SAMI and the IIED. Already this training is running. In fact, this week as we speak, IIED is running the training, and then the Cambridge University will pick this up in January and February when they will also do that. We also are working with IOSCO, and we are supporting them on sustainable finance, and we are working, of course, with the AMEC, which is the African Committee for IOSCO, and we are helping them with quite a number of things, especially on the policy side. We're also working with the SADC Green Bond. This is a program that actually covers 16 countries of the SADC, and this will be launched actually in 2022. We also, of course, carrying a very ambitious program called the Africa Green Finance Coalition, very, very ambitious for Africa. And we have big dreams on this one, even having a taxonomy that will just be designed for Africa. So this is a very ambitious program that we've started. And we are calling it a coalition because we've invited quite a number of governments into this across the continent. And it's a very ambitious program that we've built, and really one that we are running as a test and to see how far Africa actually can go towards the green finance direction. We're working with the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and we are hoping Africa will be one of the first continents actually in the world to issue your zebra bond, your elephant bonds, your rhino bonds. You brand it whatever you want in terms of nature. So we are really looking at natural capital, and we are trying to see how we can promote that. We've been working with them for a year now, designing different programs, and it's really exciting just to see what is coming out of this particular program. Yeah, so those are green bond programs. Why are green bonds important? I don't think I need to belabor on this particular slide. Again, looking at your demand side and supply side, those who are demanding those green bonds are doing so because of environmental benefits. They are being driven by ESG factors, of course, risk management. Nobody wants to be left by stranded assets. I've talked about that. There's reputational benefits, of course. Anytime you're involved in that particular space and you're seen to be taking care of people and planet. Of course, there is improvement of transparency, and I think there is quite a positive response from investors in Nigeria. We had a meeting with PENCOM the other day, and just exciting to hear the PENCOM officials speak about the sovereign green bond, and that they actually now receive annual reports from the government, and they're very excited, and this is such a big thing for the investors, that they can actually receive an annual report from the government on the performance of the bond, on the use of funds, and how the funds are being used and where they're being put in place. And you just be surprised when you sit in a room with investors and hear them speak about how important this is to them. Of course, on the supply side, on the issuer side, there's an issue of the diversification. If as MDAs now you can sit down and separate your programs and say this is brown, this is green, and you can submit that forward to your Ministry of Finance for funding with a clear direction that this is brown, this is green. Of course, increases your diversification, increases even how you start looking at things, broadens your perspective, and you start even looking for those green projects yourself. Of course, there's lowering of capital during oversubscription. A problem we've not yet attained in Africa, but we are hoping the tightening of yields actually happens soon because of the demand that we are seeing towards that particular space. And yeah, investor engagements, of course, and reputational benefits. Merits of green bond, I don't need to belabor on this, just allow me to jump this. But of course, in terms of poverty, over 50% of the population in Nigeria, these are statistics that we got from the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, and we pull them out from there. Inequality, of course, keeps promoting social cohesion. If for example, if you're doing an afforestation program as a government through your green bond or through your Ministry of Agriculture, it will probably happen in the northern part of Nigeria, and that's just inclusivity, including populations across your country. So very, very important. Green economy, challenging transition from environment and degradation, alternative capital, of course, and yeah. Investor base, how is the demand looking in Nigeria? The good news is this: Nigeria has the largest pension funds in Africa. Apart from South Africa, of course, Nigeria pension funds are the highest. Nigeria is seated with slightly over 30 billion. I think the figure as at September was $31 billion worth of pension funds. This is even more than Morocco. What Morocco has above Nigeria is the CIS. Of course, the pooling of those funds. Morocco has been able to work on the collective investment schemes, and that's why you see it pushes up Morocco in terms of investor base. But when you look at the pension funds themselves, Nigeria actually is seated with more pension funds. On your right, you see the pension funds in trillions, and we are looking at over 12 trillion worth of pension funds in Nigeria. So this is the largest pool of private capital in Africa that we have, and I think issuing $1 billion of a green bond is something that will comfortably be absorbed on an annual basis in Nigeria. So we are really hoping that the MDAs will be able to have this green lens and this green focus to be able to build projects that by the time they reach the Ministry of Finance and the DMO office, then we are speaking about an issuance of $1 billion, which the domestic market can comfortably absorb, and this, when you start issuing such sizes, it even attracts foreign investors, because the size of tickets the foreign investors are looking at is that size of ticket, and not the current issuances that we are seeing from the ministry. But when you start issuing $1 billion worth of green bonds, then foreign investors and other external investors are willing to come in because of the ticket size that they can now invest in that particular market. So ticket size is very key when even you speak about foreign investors, and starting to issue sizable bonds locally is very key. What are some of the things we've seen through our programs and our projects across Africa? Some of the lessons we've learned. Of course, the risk of greenwashing still remains. And that's why we, as Fsd Africa, we are very keen on holding all our partners and the different ministries that we work with. I'm happy to say this morning we had a meeting with the Ministry of Water and Resources and OPS WASH. We also had sanitation and water for all committee members in that particular meeting, and of course they're thinking about issuing a green bond and asking for support in project preparation, which is something we are more than happy to offer. How do we prepare a project and make sure that all the projects and all the assets that we are pointing to are actually green assets, and we are not greenwashing in any way. Of course, certification, this is something we pay for and make sure that certification goes through either with CBI or whichever channel, even second party opinion. But yeah, just to make sure the certification and even if it's a second party opinion that we have, that it is quite a credible one. And of course, there's a complexity of impact reporting. This has been a tricky part, I think, for most African countries when they issue their green bonds. And we've really also helped in this particular part of impact reporting. I think 2021, we worked again with the Department of Climate Change on reporting on the second, the issuance of the second bond, the second sovereign bond. And I think Nigeria was voted third, if I'm not wrong, by CBI. A CBI report put Nigeria third in the world in terms of your reporting. So that was just amazing to see CBI put Nigeria at such a high rank in the world. And we personally didn't expect that. We know the reporting took a lot of work, especially the forest part, whereby we couldn't find some benchmarks on computing the carbon emission on some of the trees, because some of the trees are not mature, they're of a certain height. And so we used some university research work as our basis, as our foundation to support how we were able to put up those computation. And it's just amazing to find what the amount of research work that has been done by different universities, and that you can actually use proper papers for that. Cost of issuances, of course, yes. I'm out of time, yeah?
Yes, I know. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay.
We wanted to give Infra Credit also a couple of minutes. I know we started late. We started around 5 to 3. Because of we were meant to start at 2:30 and we didn't get going until like 5 or 10 to 3. So I think your presentation will be available for the audience to share, to have access. As Gori mentioned already this morning, they have your mobile number. So I guess this will buzz in the next couple of days quite frequently. My monitor just went green, and I don't know whether the connection is still there. Hopefully.
Yes, we can hear you, Andreas. We can hear you and we can see you.
Okay. I heard that Jinwa from Infra Credit has also joined. Would you be able to put up your picture? Great. And you unmute yourself. Then I Chinua, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Good
Okay,
afternoon.
great. Then I just give a brief introduction to Infra Credit. So Chinua is the CEO of Infra Credit. He's the pioneering engineer for Infra Credit. Prior to this, he has led projects for the establishment of the Nigerian Infrastructure Credit Enhancement Facility, where he assisted Guaranco and the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority to establish InfraCredit as its first employee. Chinua has over 16 years of experience in corporate and structured finance and the debt capital market. And I think he has just recently also worked very closely together with Fsd Africa on a project. So that's just a brief introduction. Chinua, I hand over the microphone to you. You have 10, 15 minutes. And we would greatly appreciate if you could share your presentation. I don't know whether you are capable of sharing your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I just want to check if my colleague Uzo is able to do that. Uzo, please.
Yes. Let me quickly share that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to connect with everyone on this session. So I would be working through the slides, and I won't try to repeat some of the stuff that has been said before, hopefully. So let's go into the first slide. So I think it's just a quick, this is a highlight of who we are. We for infrastructure in Nigeria. We were established by the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, but we're also supported by and Guaranco as well, and also supported by KfW, AFC, Infra Africa, and AFDB. We've grown our capital base.
Yeah, I think you dropped out. I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're just coming back.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I think, so this is just really just highlighting our capital structure and our capacity. Thank you. So we've supported to date, infrastructure projects, total amount of over $150 million Naira equivalent across multiple sectors, energy, transport, and industrial parks. We also have a business school case study. And what we've been able to enable is mobilize local pension funds for the first time to invest in long-term infrastructure projects, enabling the tenor for corporate debt to extend to up to 20 years. Prior to InfraCredit's establishment, domestic credit from the capital market was limited to less than 7 years. We lengthened the yield curve from 10 to 15 and now 20 years. So there is a significant I think it's also recognizing that within the local pension fund market, there is significant amount of capacity to absorb, projects that are bankable, and that takes us to the next slide. So what we've been doing over the past few years is working with our development partners towards exploring innovative models that can unlock more climate smart infrastructure. Again, as we look at our energy transition roadmap as an institution, we've had to design one. We also paid attention to what it will take to begin to explore new asset classes that also contain some, higher perceived risk, and in some instances had to mitigate risk because of the lack of track record of these asset classes. So I'll just talk through these 4 instruments we have developed, and two of these we're already talking to Fsd Africa to pilot. And the first one is a Contingent Refinancing Guarantee. And this is, again, I just wanted to highlight just before that, it's our pipeline of what we've been doing. So since we started paying attention to climate smart infrastructure, we deliberately and intentionally started originating projects across these markets. So today we've originated projects as the size of up to 80 billion naira. And it's now about converting these projects to financial close. And this is where the real challenge typically sits, right? It's one thing to find the deals, it's another to structure them so that they are attractive enough for capital to flow. And the next slide, I'll talk about the instruments. The first one is a refinancing guarantee. Now, one of the products we developed, because we provide a guarantee of timely payment of principal and interest on a debt instrument. So what that does is it enables the project to inherit our credit rating. We have a AAA rating in local currency, and that essentially means that when we provide these guarantees, the pension funds are attracted to invest in the asset class, and that crowds in more capital. It enables financing otherwise may not have come. And for all the projects we've supported to date are first-time borrowers, so they didn't have a chance accessing the market prior to our guarantee. And what we observed for these new class of assets were also the fact that there were certain risks that we may not be able to take up front. And for that reason, we designed a guarantee that is a refinancing guarantee, essentially that enables us to review projects early, provide conditions for access to capital markets, and then look for other financiers that are willing to absorb the early risk with a conditional undertaking that if it achieves certain post-construction milestones, we can ultimately provide a guarantee for long-term financing, which would help to refinance the early stage capital. So again, this could help to mobilize more climate finance projects. We could easily play the role, which we're already doing, of aggregating these assets, and then have a funder who's willing to absorb that early stage construction risk. So the next slide. And the second model is a bridge to bond, and that's also similar to the first. So essentially, once we have this instrument in place, the bridge financier, essentially the lender who is willing to come in and provide that initial funding. And you could see that the construction finance phase is usually where we do have some constraints. Because again, like I said, some of these projects, when we look at them specifically, you have either questions around contractual cash flows, questions around the business model not being well proven, and as a result of that, capital, local currency finance or institutional capital struggle to come in. Now, again, we see this sort of bridge to bond model playing a very, very catalytic role, especially when you have local partners on the ground who are willing to work with you and have an incentive to ensure that these projects are sustainably structured in a manner that ultimately can access long-term finance. The next slide is the blended finance model. So, of course, we recognize the catalytic nature of this, either risk capital coming from donors in the form of first loss or subordinated capital. Again, this is really for us is about reallocation of capital that otherwise may have gone, into maybe projects as grants. How do we make these grants more catalytic? How do we make them blended with local financing? And these models we've tested are already working. So for us, it's really around how we could scale this up and scale it up in a meaningful way that enables us to leverage the amount of local currency financing that is available. And to put this in context, the pension funds are around $30 billion Naira equivalent AUM today, growing at about 15% per annum. Within that, about up to 35% can be allocated as domestic credit to the private sector in the form of corporate bonds or infrastructure bonds. The question is, how do we unlock, right, more of these assets in a manner that can share risk with the institutional investors? And the deals we've supported today have demonstrated there is appetite. If you look at the slide of all of the precedent transactions, the subscription rate was about 60%. So if we're able to to blend, capital that is willing to absorb or bear certain risk, ultimately delivering more affordable finance, because in certain instances you have high interest rates environment. It blends the cost by providing a tranche that actually reduces the overall cost on a weighted average basis, and then takes the upfront sort of first loss risk, but ultimately acts as a catalyst to attract more commercial finance that can sustain these projects over time as they perform, and the data becomes more available to the market. You reduce the amount of this capital. You reduce the amount of this capital and ultimately leverage it more. And the next slide. Next slide is on asset co-model. Now, this is something we've also been structuring on a couple of pipelines we're looking at, and this is where a lot of these. So we look at agro storage, climate smart agro storage, the mini grids, electric vehicles. Interestingly, we're beginning to see 1 or 2 pilots happen, and then also what we observed along these asset classes is the fact that the operators originally are constrained. Well, they started out with little capital, but as they scale up to address these market gaps, they find that the capital structure begins to be heavy in terms of the capex upfront. And the idea was, saying this is something we're already seeing happening in terms of discussions. But we have developed a structure whereby we could ring fence the assets in a separate entity and hold it as security, but still looking at the risk sharing with the development partner. But what that allows for us to do is to provide a structure where you can build contractual cash flows. The real challenge sometimes is when you're dealing with counterparties that look like more retail risk. So if it's mini grid providing energy as a service to individuals, it becomes challenging. Or you're looking at agro storage, providing storage to smallholder farmers, or dry storage for grains to smallholder farmers as well. The model is to aggregate the fixed asset in a separate vehicle and then enter into a lease agreement with the entity, so you can actually improve the accessibility and affordability of the fixed asset, because then you could finance it over a longer term, and then the ultimate cost to the end user can also be reduced. So this is a structure that we are currently looking at a couple of pipeline projects, and we believe that these models really do help to unlock leverage the asset and also unlock more capital because of just the structuring, and obviously the risk sharing would also be key on the initial set of transactions. The next slide, I think we're almost done here. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much for this short presentation. It's been with great pleasure to see how much work you've put in InfraCredit with the options you're looking at. Conscious of the time, 3:45, I was actually thinking of opening up the floor for question and answers. I don't know whether we should allow this. Otherwise, we can make your presentation available to the people in the audience as well as online, and have your contact details in there so they can contact you. I'm just waiting for someone in the from Dayo's side, or Ron to.
Gory's there.
Yeah,
there now.
Gory.
Yes, we are pressed for time, and we have to be mindful of that. We've got to have an eye on the clock.
Sure.
But I do agree with you that perhaps we should give the room the opportunity, if there's a question, a point of clarification on any of what you have heard. I'm scanning the room. I think those were comprehensive questions, comprehensive presentations, and everything is understood. And I guess everyone will have an opportunity, as you said, to review the presentation. So Andreas, John, I want to also thank Victor and Chinua for coming by and for your excellent presentations. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, highly appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. we have scheduled a break, but I'm just thinking maybe it's probably a good idea to just, go into the final session, which I think is probably going to be fairly compacted, and that way we should be aiming to end within the next 45 minutes. Now, to take this session, I'm going to be calling onto the podium Dr. Eugene Itua. Let's make him feel welcome. I think this is going to be, please come through. Also, do we have Uzi online? Yes, he's going to be joining us remotely. Uzi, would you kindly put on your video? Would you kindly put on your video so that
thank you. I'm here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you. So I'm just going to yield now for Dr. Itua to take it from here.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a long day, and so, like my colleague just said, we need to stay more than necessary. And what we're talking about is simply what you already know. You can hear me. Ozzy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can clearly. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, you recall earlier we had the NDC, the first version, and not too long ago it was reversed. But before then, recall that there was a sectorial plan. Not so many of us are familiar with this sectorial plan. Barrister Uzi, Michelia, would you want to give us a highlight of what that first version contained? Did you hear me? Uzi?
You just break up a little, but I can hear you now.
Okay, great. I was just saying that very version that was developed, the sectorial plans, not so many of us are familiar with what that version contained. Are you in position to tell us what we had in that very version?
Okay, okay. I think I missed part of what you said, but I assume you probably is asking about the 2015 2017 sectoral action plan that was developed after the first NDC was adopted. Yes, so